Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands. I play on the Xbox Series X via backwards compatibility. It's also available on the Xbox Series S, Xbox One, Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. So this Prince of Persia, while being the fifth from when they restarted on the PS2, is actually the fourth in the Sands of Time series, and takes place between the Sands of Time and the Warrior Within. You, as the prince, are being sent to another city to basically train under your brother Malik to become a better prince so that you can eventually become a king. Unfortunately, when you get there, the city is under attack, and to fend off the attackers, your brother Malik unleashes the Forgotten Sands, which unleashes Solomon's army, because he thinks it's going to save him, and of course not, it's an evil whole thing. And you being the prince, you must stop this from happening. I gotta say, I actually enjoyed the story for the most part. I will say the ending does leave something to be desired. While it does wrap up the story, it would be nice if they did something more to try and tie it into the other games. You get a really brief cutscene, and it just kind of ends the game like a wet fart. As for the audio, once again, Yuri Lowenthal is back to voice the prince, so I'm a big fan of that, although I do have some comments about it later. He does do a good job, he always does a good job, so I'm happy with that. Overall, the voiceover work in the game is well done. As is the music. The music is a beautiful, very epic orchestral score, but I will say that it doesn't necessarily capture that Mid-Eastern vibe. As for the sound effects, once again, I think the sound effects work very well in this game. I think they're well done. They add to what is going on when it comes to the creatures, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to the action and your actions. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and unfortunately that is where this game really falls apart. This game is the most dumbed down version of what Prince of Persia has been, which is a game that is all about traversal and combat. Traversal has been simplified. They do add some things that add a bit of challenge to it, but they also limit certain things, and it works better than the combat does, I will say. But one of the good additions, I will say, is you can wall run between ledges. Like when you're hanging from a ledge, you can wall run to another ledge, so I thought that was a good addition. But the problem is they stripped away some of the other things, including like traversing past death traps, far easier than it's ever been. The combat has been so dumbed down in this game. They remove the ability to counter. They give you heavy attacks, but you really don't use them. You use them on maybe one type of enemy and to break certain things. They eliminated the ability to take an opponent's weapon and dual wield. That would have been cool to have in here since it takes place in between. Like maybe that's where he learned to do it. But no, you can basically just use one attack, your basic attack, and get through everything. The whole aerial attacks that you used to do, they're there, but they're not really useful. They're honestly incredibly weak. They are so weak and so impractical to use anymore that I just now, on my second playthrough, 12 years after originally beating this game, got an achievement for using 20 of them. So that tells you that I completed this game without ever getting that achievement 12 years ago. But also, you get these special abilities like you can have a trail of fire behind you, or you can shoot these ice blasts out, things like that. Those are also overall not that useful. They're not useful enough that you need to use them, and I know that because, once again, I beat this game 12 years ago, and this playthrough is just now when I got the achievements for using them. You can go through pretty much this entire game dodging and using your base attack. So they really stripped away from the combat, and it's really just incredibly disappointing. It's not satisfying in the least. Overall, they strip back a lot of the challenge too. You get health and you get like refills for your energy, I guess you call it, so that you can rewind time, you can use your special attacks. You get that stuff so readily that it's very rare that you're ever desperate to be able to rewind time. You never feel that like, oh shit, if I screw this up, I'm gonna have to restart from a checkpoint, because guess what? You find the refills so frequently. In combat, you don't take that much damage, and even if you do, it doesn't matter because you know the health is plentiful and easy to refill. So to put it simply, the traversal elements, the traversal puzzles, the combat and the challenge of the combat and all the different moves that you need, they're not there. It's a more bare bones combat than the Sands of Time, which this game takes place after. Like I said, it would have been cool if like some of the abilities you use in Warrior Within are learned in this game because, you know, it takes place in between and it would show where he learned that shit. Also, I should say, there are definitely points where I felt like they artificially pumped up the difficulty. There are enemies that can summon other enemies, and the auto-lock in this game doesn't work well. And the reason I bring this up and combine those is because you'll be trying to target those enemies so they stop bringing in more enemies, but your character will attack everyone but, even if you're pointing your stick at the enemy you want to hit. So it just felt like they were trying to artificially pump up the difficulty in a combat situation that really isn't that difficult, in a game where the combat isn't that difficult. Which leads me into the controls, and I gotta say, playing this on a controller was a better experience than I've had thus far. This game actually gives you control over the camera, like real control over the camera, rather than the previous games. But that does not make the controls flawless. I honestly think these controls kinda suck, because there were definitely times where they did not respond to my input. There were times where I know I pressed the button I needed to press, and I was in the position I needed to be, and the game just went, fuck you, no. So obviously that is a huge disappointment. And lastly, the graphics and visuals. The first thing I'm going to call out is the Prince, because he just looks shitty, quite frankly. The Prince has always been very athletic, but a skinnier, smaller build, and this time they made him jacked as fuck for some reason. I mean, he's not as big as his brother, but he's really just overly large, especially for the moves he's performing. And it just feels really out of place, and this is where Yuri Lowenthal comes back in, is his voice just doesn't fit the new Prince, which is supposed to be the same old Prince. He has that same softer, smaller voice, and now he's got this like jacked physique. And I know the jacked physique and like really chiseled jaw and overall kind of westernized appearance comes from the fact that the Prince of Persia movie was going to come out around the same time as this game originally came out. But it just doesn't fit, and it feels weird. Like, it makes it feel like this should be a spin-off game rather than a part of that series. Like, if this was its own Prince of Persia and not a part of the Sands of Time storyline, his appearance would fit better. Overall, though, I will say the animations are well done for the running on the wall and the acrobatics. I think they're good, but it's kind of hard to believe a guy this size doing them. So I've got to call that out. But overall, I do think this world is one of the less believable worlds, because some of the stuff is really fantastic in this castle, like overly fantastic. But it is beautiful, and the detail put into it is actually really impressive. But I will say, I do think the amount of detail in, say, your weapons, the enemies, just the world around you is very well done. The detail in the Prince's armor, I think, is very impressive. I think the effects for the enemies as well as your special abilities are all very well done. I think some of the elements that they do where like you can freeze water and like jump on it, I think that's cool, and the visuals of it are very cool. I will say I did feel like this world felt a little more built around the traversal than you are traversing in the world, which is something I've praised these games for in the past, but it's not so terrible. I could be a little more nitpicky because of the other issues I've experienced in this game. I do also want to say that I am kind of disappointed from a visual element because it was always interesting the way the Prince fought. His fighting style was very unique and it was very flourishy. And in this game, it's very straightforward and quite frankly boring to look at compared to the previous games. So once again, it just feels weird when you go from the Prince of Persia Sands of Time. This supposedly takes place after that, but before Warrior Within, and his fighting style is 100% different. Not just how he fights, but like what you visually see is so different. It's kind of weird. Okay, so to wrap this up, this is probably my least favorite of the Prince of Persia games, mostly because it's boring and it doesn't fit. I probably wouldn't hate it as much if this wasn't supposed to be taking place in the same story arc as the Sands of Time, but they made so many weird changes from the Sands of Time Prince to this Prince and to how he does things and just all sorts of things, and they dumb everything down by so much that it just feels out of place. It feels like an experiment in the Prince of Persia games that shouldn't be tied to any of the other Prince of Persia games, should just be a standalone, should be some random character. And the worst part is, I actually remember not really being super into this game when I played it 12 years ago, and yeah, that continues now, so I gotta say, I don't recommend it. For all the flaws of the previous 3 games in the Sands of Time story arc, this one is the most disappointing game, and it makes those other games look better because they were trying better things, to put it simply. Okay, to wrap this up, did you play The Forgotten Sands? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.